Quick question for you. Who's the most iconic character in the Super Smash Bros. Series? You may say it's Mario, the quintessential video game protagonist who always gets headline billing. You might argue the title should go to Fox, the de facto mascot of Melee and one of the game's most consistently threatening fighters. Or Captain Falcon, the eternal fan favorite who packs in several of the series' most beloved moves and at this point is more associated with Super Smash Bros. Than the F-Zero franchise he originated from, which is just a little bit sad. For my money, though, that title has to go to Kirby, the adorable pink puffball who serves as the gentlest possible introduction to the game's core mechanics. The inhale, the down air, the stone, the flight. Kirby's unique, entertaining, yet highly forgiving nature has made him an incredible place for many people to start their Smash journeys with. He was such a welcoming yet competent addition all the way back in the very first Smash game, and then got pile-driven into the ground with the strength of 1,000 suns. 2 decades later, and he's still licking those wounds. Let's talk about why.
This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. Protect your online data from being tracked, targeted, and God knows what else with a robust virtual private network packed with features that are safe, useful, and even, just maybe, a little bit fun. You want data encryption even on public Wi-Fi? You got it! Unlimited device installations on a single subscription. I don't know why they allow that, but done. Better Netflix offerings than just your own country's? Canadian here, believe me, I feel that. And not a problem for Surfshark VPN's regional servers. The internet is global. Why should your streaming service options be local? Get yourself a slick 83% discount plus 3 additional months absolutely free on high-quality, no-log VPN coverage with promo code MockRock. Link in the description.
So, Kirby hasn't exactly had the best track record as a competitive character, but that doesn't mean he's been lost from the start. In the original Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64, Kirby was quickly figured out to be one of the game's best characters, a title that he still holds to this day behind only Pikachu, arguably the most consistently strong character in the series' history and the only one that can do this, in a game where most of the cast has to deal with this. Only 2 years later, though, the world got its sequel Melee, and oh dear. Now, in Brawl, he did see some improvement, moving from absolute bottom tier to more of the lower mid-range area, although that was also the game where these guys existed, so being anywhere outside of the top 10 and even sometimes in it was a pretty rough life. Smash 4 brought about a couple of interesting developments, as Kirby was one of the characters first proposed to have a reasonable matchup against Sheik, who was a dominant character for a good chunk of the game's life, but still ultimately proved to be an extremely niche character, usually placed in low tier or, even with the most optimistic perspectives, essentially never rising outside of the lower mids. And once again, the competition ended up being pretty stiff. And after that, we arrive at Ultimate, the most recent Smash game and one which has, once again, not been especially kind to the little guy. Now, thankfully, Ultimate is probably the best balanced Smash game overall, certainly in comparison to its roster size, so even the lowest characters have some reasonable tools. Which is good because Kirby usually sits among them, again rarely having an argument made for him outside of lower mid-tier at absolute best. So that's the what. Now let's talk about the why. Why, after such a strong debut, has Kirby struggled so hard to make an impact as soon as players start taking the game more seriously? Well, the best place to start is probably with his core traits. These are extremely important to Masahiro Sakurai, the game's creator, who takes meticulous care to match the feel of characters in the Smash series to how they feel at home. Most of the time. Yep, can't have a MockRock video without complaining about Ganondorf. That's why the ice climbers jump so weakly, Donkey Kong is surprisingly quick, and why Ridley almost didn't make it in. The cost of sacrificing his size and flying was considered to be a very heavy one. If we look at how Kirby plays in his own titles, we notice a few things. He's small, not terribly fast on the ground, even slower in the air, of course being compensated with multiple jumps, and he's very simple. And if we look at how he plays in Smash, we see exactly those traits. He plays very similarly across both series, and considering the same man created them both, and Smash seems to borrow a decent amount of mechanics from the Kirby games, it would actually be surprising if that wasn't the case. No matter what else he has across games, those will remain, so if Kirby's going to be stuck with these particular traits, is that a good or a bad thing? Being small is a mixed bag. It makes Kirby much harder to land a hit on than bigger characters, especially when combined with his exceptionally low crouch, which has gotten him past all sorts of bad situations over the years. On the flip side though, it also means that a lot of characters have much longer reach than him, which makes it harder for him to land hits in return. This is compounded severely by his subpar mobility, meaning that if an opponent is determined not to get hit by Kirby, or at least control the pace of the match, it's generally pretty easy for them to do. Weak mobility is an outrageously bad handicap in the Smash titles. It's hard to overstate just how much this harms a character, and it also means that his multiple jumps are hindered quite a bit because of how little distance he can travel with each one. These jumps are, again, a theoretical trade-off for going burst movement in exchange for additional versatility, but that versatility is cut down so much by his poor air movement that I'd say it becomes more of a detriment. His simple design? That doesn't say too much about his viability. We've got good simple characters, good complex characters, bad simple characters, and bad complex characters. You can make an argument that good simple characters are the ones most worth putting the time into because you can get them up to speed the fastest and they're harder to make mistakes with, particularly if you play multiple characters, but in the grand scheme of things, I'd still call complexity relatively neutral for character viability. Overall though, if we take a look at his core traits and factor in how poorly some of them synergize with his poor mobility, I'd say that Kirby is coming into each game primed to be weak. But, of course, we know that's not inevitable because he's been great before. No matter how bad a character's core may be, it's always possible to make up for it with a good enough moveset. Being the slowest character in the game doesn't mean anything if you can just nuke the entire stage. Kirby may not have access to a nuke. Well, okay, at least not in Smash 64, but he did get up tilt, which was about as close to that as you could reasonably ask for. It was incredibly fast, locked people into shield break setups off a single hit, juggled exceptionally well, and didn't have to worry about that stubby range thing because its hitbox looked like this. Yeah. That's far and away Kirby's best move in Smash 64, and one of the more notorious attacks in the entire series, but his kit was absolutely packed with these kinds of strong, useful, surprisingly large moves to draw from, which more than compensated for his built-in weaknesses. He was so good, in fact, that the developers decided to tone him down in Melee, and in what's become something of a recurring story in the world of Smash, massively overcompensated. His solid attacks, almost entirely driven into the ground. His good throws, they could now bizarrely be mashed out of mid-throw. The new side special that every character got coming into Melee, Samus got her missiles, Mario his cape, Captain Falcon his raptor boost, and Kirby got hammer. Don't use hammer. This, sadly, was to be the Kirby model that the series stuck with much more so than his Smash 64 iteration. Of course, some of his more egregious issues were fixed. The throw mashing disappeared, hammer was changed to have at least some purpose, and a lot of his close combat tools were changed to be generally fine and, in the best cases, even quite good, but never enough to make up for how difficult it is to actually get them over to your opponent. Now, a lot of them actually aren't too far off the mark. Personally, I'd make up tilt combo until later percents, down tilt combo reliably rather than being random, make up air a bit faster, danner have less landing lag, up throw kill earlier, but they're in the ballpark and do perform the role of very obvious, intuitive attacks which do exactly what you'd expect, perfect for the beginner-friendly character Kirby is designed to be. They still need some work, but my bigger issue with Kirby throughout the years into the modern day is how his special moves play out. First off, let's talk about hammer. While it's true just awfulness has been dialed back from the Melee days, it's still quite a bad move that rarely sees use in any serious match, and I might also add is just kind of boring. Kirby has one of the widest move pools of any character in Smash, and while I'd honestly argue that way more of those moves should have worked their way into his kit rather than all the generic punches and kicks, he is supposed to be very simple, so I guess we can let that one slide. There are fan versions of Kirby that take this kind of approach, and they're interesting, but also clearly coming at the character with a very different philosophy. At the very least, though, special moves are where you're generally supposed to be able to go a bit crazy with characters' kits, but in Kirby's case, hammer is just kind of a smack. It's a big smack, but smacking people is most of what Kirby does to begin with, so it's really not adding that much to him, even disregarding how bad an attack it is, which is a lot to disregard. Stone and Final Cutter, on the other hand, I think are better inclusions, but they're also inexplicably weak. For a long time I just assumed that they were trying to match the feel of the Kirby series, but when I went back to play the Kirby games for my last video about him, they turned out to be way more responsive than I was expecting. Now, Stone is a very popular move in casual gameplay, and the way it's used competitively doesn't lean that much on speed, so while I do think it could have a bit of startup shaved off in a way that slightly helps its viability without becoming too annoying on a casual level, I don't think this one is the end of the world. And honestly, if I were speaking purely from a competitive perspective, I'd say that Stone should just be replaced entirely. It's realistically never going to be a great move, but it's Stone. I'm not doing that. Final Cutter, on the other hand, oh boy. This move was also made slower than it appears in the Kirby series. Much slower, in fact, and I truly don't understand why. The end result is one of the weakest recovery moves, weakest projectile moves, and weakest close combat up specials on a character that absolutely did not need this kind of drawback added to him. Final Cutter closer to how it appears in Kirby would be a very solid up special out of shield, something that many characters can already access, and in fact because Kirby is designed as a close range brawler, he'd be a better candidate for this type of attack than many of the fighters that already have one. Smash 4 essentially did this with its custom moves, with his uppercutter trading the landing hitbox and projectile for a much faster startup, and I've gotta say, it made Kirby feel much more complete as a character. Not overwhelming or unfair, and in fact I think letting him keep some aspect of the descending portion would have been totally fine, but it really did greatly improve Kirby in a reasonably fair manner that directly played into his simple, close quarters brawler design. I'd personally consider this to be a no-brainer, fairly improving his viability and increasing his canonical faithfulness in a single change. But of course, if we're going to discuss anything about Kirby, we have to discuss his Inhale. This is a conceptually brilliant attack. Kirby is the beginner character of beginner characters. I really can't think of one in any game genre that does such a good job welcoming newcomers without being boring, and the ability to sample the entire roster's move list is such a key part of this. And yet, from a competitive perspective, it's kind of underwhelming. So first, the elephant in the room, his copy abilities. There's no way these things are ever going to be perfectly useful in every matchup. The copy ability can be great, awful, or anywhere in between. You manage to grab some fire arrows, suddenly you're a whole lot harder to run away from. You snag Monado Arts, you're a godlike being who can tear through everything in his path. Kirby has a gun. Terrifying. On the other side, you probably don't ever want Warlock Punch for anything but a funny highlight moment. And of course, there are varying degrees of effectiveness anywhere in between. This aspect of Inhale, for the record, is not a problem, and in fact it's an inevitable part of the move. But let's talk about the actual Inhale. Command grabs, or special moves which go through shields in the same way grabs do, are usually pretty good based on that attribute alone, but apart from that inherent strength, Inhale is pretty meh. Its speed is quite respectable for this type of move, and its range is okay, although significantly hindered by being attached to such a slow character. But what really kills Inhale is just how vulnerable Kirby is if he misses. Here are a few attacks less risky to go for than Inhale. Ganondorf's Flame Choke, Lucario's Force Palm, Incineroar's Alolan Whip, Mii Brawler's Suplex, and Diddy Kong's Monkey Flip. While Kirby's Inhale is a bit faster to start up than all of these moves, it's also significantly laggier and its range doesn't even begin to compare. When we look at other command grabs with more comparable range, but also typically attached to faster characters, this discrepancy becomes, if anything, even worse. Out of every character on the entire roster, Kirby is the one I'd most like to see incentivized to use their command grab as often as possible, because Inhale is such a unique, interesting, and entertaining move. However, the best way to incentivize using a move is to give it a very good risk-reward ratio, and as established, Inhale's risk is quite high. Its reward? Sure, in some matchups it's good, but in many others it's passable at best, compared to the consistently high reward most command grabs tend to bring to the table. Low risk and high reward is the gold standard to aspire to, and Inhale is just not providing that. For the record, yes, this is taking the notorious Kirby side into account. It's cute, it's funny, in some previous games it could be somewhat rough to try and get around, but because the modern titles have limited how much invincibility you can get on the ledge, it's a rare sight to actually see someone go for in a serious match nowadays. Smash has always been in a weird spot as a competitive series, at times aligning with and fighting against that label to varying degrees, but even taking this into account, I still think Kirby has had a pretty rough go of things. Even in Ultimate, a game that absolutely considers competitive gameplay with a ridiculous amount of of the roster being reasonably viable, Kirby is still saddled with burdens I'd call flat out unnecessary, and it's a shame. As mentioned, Kirby is the gateway character. He's what turned a lot of people into lifelong fans of the series, me included. I've talked before about my earliest Smash memories playing Melee at a friend's house, hovering above everyone on Temple and trying to land on them with stone. Although I didn't actually know you could choose which special move came out at the time, so it was more hovering above everyone and hoping I was lucky enough to get the stone, and I was still perfectly happy to do so. A lot of people have similar stories, and jumping from that into the competitive world and hearing that Kirby has almost no presence and that a lot of the presence he does have often excludes his most iconic tools for a more casual audience can be pretty disheartening. Now, of course, it's not the developer's job to promote Smash tournaments, and realistically, Smash has far more casual fans than diehard competitors, but I'm always of the opinion that if you can make a change that will please one side of the fan base and not harm the other, it's almost always a good change to make. Kirby isn't the single most mistreated character in the series. There are worse fates than being stuck in what's arguably lower mid-tier for the latter half of your life, but I think his story is sad because there's no character more worthy of being powerful, nor is there a character where making them powerful would be more impactful to the game's most invested players. There are a ton of opportunities to do that with Kirby, and let's hope that one day they come true, because I, for one, am tired of this destroyer of gods losing to every new bit of spiky-haired anime nonsense that waltzes in. Including the ones that also destroy gods. Which I guess is actually a lot of them. Damn it, Japan. Thanks for watching, everyone, and let me know your thoughts on Kirby. Liking and commenting on this video increases how much YouTube shares it, so if you think it deserves that, much appreciated. There's a video on Ultimate's most overrated moves above, some anime nonsense discussion on my second channel below, and patrons, YouTube members, and Twitch subs get stuff like early videos and access to my Discord server. Later, people!